Jacob, Laura, and Greg in BSides 2025. So, un gran aplauso, por favor, para ellos. So, guys, we have a tradition. That tradition is before that you start to share all of that information. Please take the mezcal. It's a shot of mezcal. So, please continue with the BSides tradition. ¡Ay, un gran aplauso porque están aventando ese mezcalito! So, thank you so much, and we can start.
You got it?
Hola.
Yeah, there you go.
Hola. Yo soy Laura. Él es Jacob. Nosotros somos the Arctic Wolf. No hablamos español, so we're going to do it in English. Yay. Thank you guys so much for having us here at Arctic Wolf. We're so excited to share this research that we have for you. We have a threat actor called Greedy Sponge, which we're surfacing for the first time today. Jacob and his team have done a lot of excellent work on this research, and so we're so excited to bring it to you to help inform the community. We're excited to be here with all of you because the cybersecurity is a wonderful community that's global. We're globally connected. We're here to make connections with you, and we're here to expand our knowledge and share this with you so that you can protect your companies and also learn a little bit more about the skills of threat hunting that you can apply if you're a single researcher, if you're in a small company, medium-sized, large company, everybody can start threat hunting. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I'm Laura Stratton. I'm the senior manager for the tactical threat operations team at Arctic Wolf. And so what that means is we're on the front lines looking at all the telemetry coming in. We're the first to see incidents. We're the first to be right there next to incident response. We collect the intelligence of that. We take what happened in that incident, what can we learn from it? We turn it into how to be better next time through detections, through support, through changing configurations, through bolstering defenses. And so some of my history comes from working with other companies. I worked for General Electric, global team there, tracking Russian threats. I've also worked at agencies, three-letter agencies, National Security Agency for the US, doing threat intelligence there, tracking threats. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Jacob so he can tell you about himself.
Hey. So I am Jacob Ferris. I'm a principal threat researcher at Arctic Wolf as well. Guess my background right now is basically writing threat intel reports. That's basically my full-time job right now. I've got a background coming from reverse engineering for the Air Force in USA. If that's not obvious. Uh, and then I've worked for General Dynamics as in their Security Operations Center, and also as General SOC intelligence, and then moving over to MSS work for NTT, which is Nippon Telephone and Telegraph. So I did a lot of threat intel tracking with them until I moved over to Arctic Wolf. You want to hit the next slide? So my background originally was from classic SIM analysis. So taking a look at like Alien Vault logs, where you pass this log up into either Alien Vault or like ArcSight, and sitting there for like 12 hours looking at different snort alerts or syslog information that comes across, and then trying to identify what is malicious and what isn't. I got to eventually graduate into an actual SOC, and doing DevSecOps and trying to actually build out better detections for a single client, right? Because I was working for General Dynamics at the time in their SOC, and actually like improving one thing instead of just dealing with incident response. After a while, I finally ended up at MSS's, where you get to see real threat actors that are targeting multiple people instead of just one group. I think Laura's going to tell you a little bit more about MSS.
Yeah, so I want to tell you a little bit more about Arctic Wolf itself and the wealth of telemetry that we're able to use for threat hunting. And so MSS Managed Security Services allows us not to just look at one organization, but multiple organizations. So immediately when we find something that looks anomalous, that might be malicious, we can look across different organizations, which really helps us identify what's going on. Because some customers may have full tech stacks that include cloud integrations and identity integrations and detections, as well as an EDR. And then you may have some clients that only have EDR. And so having the ability to use an MSS for your threat hunting is really, really beneficial. That's how folks like Jacob and I can find attribution, and we can identify a full attack chain when we publish these blogs for you all in the community to use to bolster your defenses. It really enhances our telemetry and logs to be able to go across sources. So that's the story that we're coming from. It's being able.
Yeah, I was gonna say that also, like with an MSS, as opposed to just looking at like one person being targeted, right? Like if I'm a single company and I get targeted by like mouse spam, I just know that I've been hit with mouse spam. As an MSS, we're able to look across multiple tenants and see that like a lot of people have been compromised or only specific groups are being targeted. And so we can see like this industry, like this transportation industry is being targeted, or like these ones are only going after government assets, and like what type of information is being targeted, whether it's financial or what have you, as opposed, our view is just expanded so much larger than a single tenant SOC.
And then we can provide that information to you all, which is really what we're here to do. So great. Thanks, Jacob. So we're going to start off by talking about what is threat hunting. Threat hunting is ideally proactively looking for threats in your environment. As some of you have experienced and may know that sometimes you do threat hunting after an incident happens. You're working for an organization, you have an incident happen, and you're trying to determine whether or not what happens, can we prevent it from happening again, right? It's essentially the backbones of threat hunting. But ideally, you want to get to a state in your maturity level of your security operations to be able to look for threats on a regular basis, right? So it sometimes can be reactive, sometimes can be proactive. And what we're going to talk about today is how do you come up with a plan for how you want to start your threat hunting? What type of targeting should you be looking for? So what type of research should you be doing? And then also, Jacob's going to go over every tool that he used for this research. Not every tool possible. Every tool he used for this particular research that is available to you all, right? So there's lots of tools that will become available to you as you work for a large organization. But today we're going to cover tools that are available to you today. What are some public open source tools that you can use to start threat hunting? Is there anything you wanted to add to this? Okay. So why do we threat hunt? So Jacob alluded to that. When you work for an MSS, you try to identify what the threat actors are going after. Is this an opportunistic threat? Is this a threat that's going over government assets? Are they looking to gather information? Are they just trying to get money? Are they going for different sizes? Are they targeting the user base, or are they targeting the actual devices? So that's why we want to do. It's important to look at why we do threat hunting, because the goal here is to identify what is most likely to happen to you and what is most dangerous to happen. Yep. Okay, so this is my 5-step plan. This was made by Laura Stratton, so if you take a picture, please put my name to it. This is coined. No, I'm just kidding. But this is really what we use as our process as a team. So if you're working by yourself, you're working in a small team or a large team, these are really the 5 things that you want to do when you start looking at how you want to threat hunt. You want to gather your information. When you gather information, you're identifying what's available to you. What log sources do you have? What information's available to you? For us, we have lots of telemetry, but for you, you may be limited to only having one log source, right? So if you know that's a Fortinet device, you may only have that log source available to you, which means you might have to identify resources that go beyond the information that you have. So if you only have one type of log or 2 types of log, you want to make sure you understand what resources can I extend to. Is there a place that I can go to on open source that provides me a tool? Does my company have a tool that I can use to correlate information? Can I use a tool like OpenCTI or MISP to correlate data points off of several incidents or several telemetry points? And then you go, okay, I know what I'm looking at. I know what I have available to me to use. Well, now I've got to conduct research. Research is a very, very big part of threat intelligence and a very big part of threat hunting. So before you get started on a threat hunting adventure or on a threat hunting team, know that research is heavily involved. There's so much information on open source available to you to be able to frame what the community already knows about this threat, how did they others defend it? So if you're working in a banking industry, you want to talk to other banks regularly to find out what they know. Or, hey, we just got hit with this greedy sponge. Do you know anything about how they did this? Have you seen this fish before? Have you seen this file before? What are some things that you've seen? And then form a hypothesis. How do we form, and we're going to talk more about the attack chain and how you can use frameworks that are available to you to frame a hypothesis. But you essentially want to tell yourself, hey, how do I think the threat actor got in, and what do I think they wanted? Understanding what they want can help you build the path to get there. So if you know that they're looking for information, they're looking for money, they're looking to exploit users, then it can help you identify where you need to look for that information. And then this, again, coined by Laura Stratton, make a plan, right? Because one of the most important things about threat hunting, I'll go ahead and tell you, and Jacob will attest to this, is sometimes it's really important to understand where you stop. You may hit a dead end and go, there's nothing more here. How many more resources and time do I dedicate to this threat? Sometimes you just got to know when to throw in the towel and move on. If you have a plan, you can set up regular checkpoints and say, okay, I couldn't get this data. I've reached a stopping point. Time to move on. Anything you want to say? Okay, so this is really what the process looks like, right? So when you're going through threat hunting, you may have one piece of information, and then you can pivot. So if you have, for example, you have the phishing email that your user opened, that's a place to start. You know exactly what URL that they were directed to. That's a good place to start. And then you can start pivoting and say, okay, well, what were they likely to do next? And then you kind of go down the rabbit hole, which Jacob is really going to walk you through the rabbit hole, right? That is research. And you may get so many data points. You may find out like, wow, they were hosting on so many URLs, and this is where that they were located. These were the different sectors that they were targeting. And then you get this huge conglomeration of data points, and you're trying to find out, what can I gather from this? And so you take that big group of data points, and you start identifying, even here, you can start seeing the clusters, right? You can start seeing mass activity in the center. So that may be a region, a location that you can start focusing on, maybe an ASN that has been used for these threats in this campaign that you can start focusing on. And then you start feeding that information back through the pipeline, right? Because ideally you want to find out where that detection is. I know you have some more to add here.
Well, I mean, there's the other direction too. Right?
Bi-directional, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's bi-directional. Because for us, when you're at a company, you might have an MSS, you might have all those data points, and you're trying to find out, well, what's the root point of compromise? What was the initial reason how they got in? Where was our defenses lacking? Where was our gap?
Yeah, like sometimes it can be overwhelming starting over here on the right side where you have a million data points and trying to reduce it down to one. That was one of the main points of this. Like after, like generally from a single company, you start at the one point and you're like, oh, I got a piece of malware or phishing email. What does that actually look like? What can we identify some infrastructure on the back end and try and identify like what else might be coming or where else they're attacking. But from like the MSS side where you have like so much information, you generally start all the way over here and you're trying to figure out what are these smaller clusters that I can dig into, and then where can I find out important information, right? Like what can I write a detection off of? What can I say like this is a specific individual and that's coming down to a single point. And so threat intel is all about pivots.
Great. So this is really the process that we follow over and over again. As you can see, there's a lots of like flow chart here of like, yes, this is the case, and so we're going to do that. But it all starts with an initial finding. It starts with some anomalous piece of information. It starts with a malicious incident. It starts with an email. It starts with an unauthorized sign-in. Everything starts with an initial finding. And then what we want to do is investigate the victims. In your case, if it's a single organization, it might be like which users were impacted here, which endpoints were impacted here, which devices were they, what were they connected to, what did they have availability to? If you're in the case of an MSS, it might be like, hey, I want to know, is this localized to a particular sector? Are they only going after banking information, and so therefore all of their lures are for you and the users to go ahead and sign in to your banking information that's already been taken over by the threat actor? And so investigating the victims is important to understand the scope and the breadth of what you're looking for. It can help guide where the next pivot point is. It can help guide what resources you use, as well as who you collaborate with in the next phases. And then we're going to talk more about identifying the attack chain, but you really want to identify which source you have and where in the attack chain that is. got that next. And then, do you have any network IOCs? And you're gonna follow this. I'm gonna let you talk about this part because it's very specific. Is it just me? Do you want me to share this guy? Okay. We've been cut off and only have one.
No, I think the battery ran out on this one. There you go. So, generally, my process over here, as soon as you've actually identified where you are in the attack chain, you need to figure out whether you've got network IOCs or not. If you don't have any network IOCs, you're going to have to take a look at your binaries and actually try and pivot through those until you do have network IOCs. Because one of the key points of threat hunting is to identify a group or a campaign. So you're trying to identify like an entire entity as opposed to just your one individual item. So network IOCs are one of the best ways to do that because you can identify actor infrastructure. So I really, really, really want network IOCs so that I can say, oh, what is the other infrastructure they're using either for C2 or delivery or even like actor on keyboard accessing systems. And then I can pivot that to new binaries and do that in a cyclical fashion where I say, oh, this is their delivery infrastructure, what's the new stuff that they're actually putting out, and then what are the new C2s that they're utilizing. And that goes on and on and on in a cycle until you have a fairly big graph like we had from the previous slide. If you don't have any network IOCs, again, you get to use Yara, you get to go through different OSINT tools. You can use VirusTotal to do those pivots depending on what your like binaries or ELF files look like and try and find new information. But it's always this cyclical thing of trying to expand that graph as large as you can as long as they're actually related. Followed by sticking out to an output, which in our case is a blog or some sort of detections, right? Like you might not think it, but whenever you publish something, even if you haven't written any detections, somebody else will write detections on the things that you publish, and it will stop people for at least a little while.
And one of the great things about network IOCs and why they're so important is that's really how you can identify earliest on in the attack chain. The earliest indications are going to be network IOCs. And so they're the most valuable things to share with others if you're in the middle of something that's happening that's very relevant and timely. Network IOCs can give you that very first initial access. A lot of times companies will have the ability to just be able to block malicious network IOCs and stop activity that way in the future. These also, the downside is they change all the time, right? So they're on a rotating basis. So network IOCs can be really, really beneficial to scope and to pivot off of, but they do change frequently. So we're gonna talk more about how we deal with when a network IOC changes, how we pivot from that. Okay, so, but where do I start? Where's a good starting point? I've never done threat hunting before. This is my first time really exploring that. I find that it's most beneficial to work from a framework. We have there's several available frameworks. Some of the most common ones we use at Arctic Wolf, of course, MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's important to try and use a framework because it's common language. In a community, having common language is golden. It allows you to communicate with other organizations and you're speaking essentially the same language even across the globe, right? You go all over across the globe and they're gonna know, hey, this is what a normal attack chain looks like, this is what normal MITRE works like. Globally, this is just an accepted framework, and so it's important to get familiar so that when you're working with others, sometimes you may have to work with other countries. You wanna know how to talk to them in a way that everyone knows exactly the type of information you're talking about. So reconnaissance, weaponization, those are things that highly evolved security teams will take a look at, active researchers will take a look at, but the real meat and potatoes, the real action happens between delivery, exploitation, installation, and command and control. This is where you're going to be catching incidents, this is where your evidence is gonna come from, this is where your detections are gonna be deployed. The goal is to, of course, get as close to delivery as possible, but oftentimes, depending on your tech stack, you may only see exploitation and installation, or you may be just catching the C2. So it really depends on what your tech stack is. Jacob's gonna give you some examples of what you might find at delivery, exploitation, installation, and command and control. Do you wanna give a few examples?
Well, if you're coming from delivery, you're generally coming through phishing, right, and mouse spam. Installation is your malware actually hitting a system and trying to like find out where you can pivot from that. Command and control is going to be your network indicators going out. But one of the big things you'll notice whenever you're doing threat hunting is you're almost always just moving one stage to the left or right on the cyber kill chain. Like whenever you find malware on your system through installation, you're then going to start looking for, well, how do they exploit my system, or how do they do the delivery? And then you're going to go out in the other direction saying, like, what are the command and control servers that are actually being accessed? You are rarely going to be hopping, all the way across to reconnaissance from installation and saying, like, who scanned me, and now how did it get on my system? So following the cyber kill chain is a really good process for choosing your next step and where to look.
And it's always okay to go backwards, right? So sometimes you may get alerts on command and control, and you're like, well, what do they go after first? Like, why did they set this up? They must have something that they want to send over. So you can always go back to installation. Well, can I find the piece of malware that's been deployed? And if I can find the file and binary, how can I go use these tools that Jacob's going to go over, like VirusTotal and such, to use the open source information to find out what's going on with that binary? So you don't actually have to have any reverse engineering skills. You don't have to have experience doing reverse engineering to do threat hunting, right? This is available to everyone because so many out there in the community have already done that work for you. So more than likely, if you've seen a binary, it's already uploaded to VirusTotal, and you can identify the components, other C2s that are available.
Or on Twitter, and somebody else
Twitter,
is already analyzing
that's
or
right.
X at this point, I guess.
Yeah.
Now I'm old.
All right, now we're going to get to the exciting parts where Jacob's going to tell you all about the open source tools that are available to you. Oh, you want the clicker?
Yeah, I want the
But
clicker.
I like the clicker.
All right, so the primary tool that I probably use is VirusTotal as far as the OSINT stuff is concerned. You can get incredible amounts of network telemetry and relationships. Also included is like all the binary associations, and then being able to pivot off of any dropped files. Plus they have sandboxing built in. I don't know that there is any one larger open source of information. I'll go stand not in front of a monitor. If you're looking to pivot via network information or network telemetry, Shodan is incredible. They've done an excellent job of actually logging services, giving you some historical record of what was hosted, because a lot of times you're looking at stuff that was maybe only alive last month as opposed to today. Census does pretty similar stuff. They are also an internet scanner. They are scanning everybody, trying to figure out what services are going on any ports, and then actually logging those for you. So whenever you are trying to identify infrastructure, you don't have to just go off of IP addresses. You can go over unique things like SSL certificates, or even like hashing a HTTP body. Zoomeye also does the same thing, except they have an even larger historical access. So Census has recently put a paywall over almost all of their information that's useful for pivoting on, which is a huge pain. Shodan a while ago put a paywall behind over a lot of their information. So Zoomeye is Chinese, and they, for some reason, don't have a paywall, probably because they want to harvest all of our information. We're accessing them. But that doesn't mean their information isn't useful. So I use these guys almost daily, trying to hunt down what C2 or delivery infrastructure is actually related, and then trying to pull out new binaries through those relationships. Yeah. Do you want to do the where it starts? You want me to do it?
No, why don't you cover where it starts?
Okay, so where do I actually start whenever I'm looking for information? A lot of times for me, that starts from a single incident. I'm almost acting like I'm doing an incident response engagement from logs. I'll get a binary that alerts as malicious, and then I'll start running off on sandboxing that, and then pivoting on any of the indicators that are spit out. But maybe you don't have binaries. Maybe you don't have snort logs that are popping up for you because you are a college student and you're not actually looking at corporate logs, right? How do you even get started on looking for stuff? So VirusTotal actually has a lot of searching options for you. Let's say that you wanted to find something specifically from Mexico. You could look up VirusTotal submitters and documents being submitted by them with exploits from very specific times that have positive values. And all of a sudden, you have a lot of things to look into and start trying to identify threat actors that are specifically targeting your region. Yeah. Also, you can hit all of those other sources that I talked about earlier, Census, Shodan, Zoomai, and you can do complex queries to actually identify infrastructure. A lot of people have already done that work for you. If you go out to GitHub DRB-A or RA for the C2 Intel feeds, they have a ton of census searches that are already pre-built for you to look for SSL certificates, like JOF3, JARM hashes, like any of those things that are built around even like the C2 frameworks. So like you can identify a large majority of like Havoc servers that are online at any point in time, Demos, Mythic, and while a lot of these are being used by pen testers, a lot aren't. A lot are being utilized by malicious actors, nation states, so that they can stay under the radar, because something that everybody else is using is also very difficult to give attribution to.
Right, because the goals of the threat actor is to look as much like normal activity as possible. I just wanted to note also that VirusTotal is very common for organizations to have higher licenses for VirusTotal, and that way you can actually practice out writing your own YARA rules and seem to identify which strings are actually successful in looking for malware out in the wild, which can then translate to helping find malware within your environment. The other thing I want to note is that Shodan, while some of those features are behind paywalls, we use Shodan all the time, the public and free open version of Shodan, to identify which of our customers have infrastructure exposed to the internet. A lot of times, when you're deploying a new device or you're setting up the IT services for a new company, it's very common for those organizations to have publicly exposed IP addresses. So it's good routine practice for an organization to just go ahead and check their public IP infrastructure across Shodan to see if they have been, if they're vulnerable to new vulnerabilities that have been exposed, and just to identify a good starting point for where threat actors are likely to target.
Yeah, this type of stuff is one of my favorite ways to actually pivot into threat actors. We have gathered a lot of NetFlow information, and we'll actually identify jump hosts off of people that are utilizing C2 infrastructure, and then you can almost always figure out who are the pen testers and who aren't based on the hosting infrastructure they're using. A lot of times they'll use like the domains that they register actually registered to the company of the pen testing group, and so you can pretty quickly start ruling those out. And whenever you have that NetFlow data or any ISP level information, you can start identifying where threat actors are accessing the C2s from. Because a lot of times they aren't using VPNs or Tor, they're actually standing up like their own servers inside of DigitalOcean, they're standing their own stuff up inside of Alibaba, and if you have access to that, you can actually see when they're accessing things.
Now for the good stuff, which you've all been waiting for.
How did I find Greedy Sponge? So Greedy Sponge started with an incident, and I'm going to walk you guys through all of the steps that I took going from the initial finding of binary on a single tenant, identifying the infrastructure that was actually used for delivery, phishing, and for C2, and then what I think is the actual intent for the group involved.
You can tell a lot by intent, by how things are executed, by who's being targeted, where the targets are happening. You learn a lot about intent.
Yeah. So I initially found a weird binary called chonkla.exe that was...
the chonkla. Oh boy, this is where it starts.
So this was seen on just one of our tenants here in Mexico, and it was reaching out to uberrunplay.com. I actually found this back in, I initially saw uberrunplay.com back in like 2022, but there weren't a ton of samples up on VirusTotal at the time. But whenever I went to the C2, it told me to fuck off. And I took that
As you can see our famous sponge right here. This is why we call it Greedy Sponge, because the most famous sponge on the planet was used by the threat actors.
So
against us.
So it's pretty unique JPEG. It had a favicon of Mr. Burns up there, so I felt like there was something that was fairly easily trackable, or at least unique about the C2 infrastructure that we could actually go after. This is no longer used because I published a blog 2 years ago, year and a half ago, about this same threat actor before we decided that we needed to name them because I thought that they were just a one-off. So, my process for all of this looks very similar to the flowchart that we had earlier. I found an initial sample, grabbed the binary, found new C2s, found the domains, pivoted off of those, pulled new samples from the C2 infrastructure, from that delivery infrastructure, and got a nice little feedback loop. The new samples were actually being released like monthly. New MSIs were being generated every other day and being sent to tenants. We were also able to pivot over through NetFlow information to identify victims here in Mexico, find the actor jump post that they were accessing everything from, and then pivot through Whois data to find the phishing infrastructure. So on the initial binary, I took a look through VirusTotal. I was able to identify it was identified as Alcor, which happens to be true, but you always want to double check that. We also had this identify on our own internal YAR scanning infrastructure, but it's always good to validate through multiple sources. So how does that rule actually trigger? So mainly you see things like main socket, get full string. In the original Alcor samples, you would see the Alcor remote string actually exists inside of the binary. That was not really the case for this. In fact, we really only saw a handful of these strings. So I dumped all the strings because I wanted to figure out what it actually was, if it was Alcor or not. And I really don't like reversing Delphi, but we got there. So we found a handful of strings that actually do match, but we found even more that don't. And none of these are in English. And it's fairly interesting to see malware not written in English and having unique strings built out inside of it. So we need to start hunting for all of these samples. So the binary also had very unique metadata inside of it. So they were using this create UPRPS win service string inside of their metadata for every single one of their Alcor rats. That has changed. They did updates after we published stuff about them. We can still pretty easily find them though. And these two were some of the key pivots.
Can you go back 1 second? Just want to point something out. So if you're new to threat hunting, one big red flag that you're going to see is if the file's not signed. That's no bueno. No bueno. We want to check that out. We want to take a good look at it.
Yeah. So whenever I pivot on that string, all of a sudden we found 44 different samples of the same Alcor rat. And even though these down here don't say Alcor, they most certainly are. You can go through and find, and then we started pivoting. So now we wanted to see what all of these were reaching out to. They happened to be reaching out to the same C2s at the time, but they did have a special structure. We found relationships to zip file. Somebody uploaded a zip file with the actual MSI inside of it, and we were able to find the full attack chain. So the original zip that is being passed, most likely through mouse spam. We don't have the email, but I don't know why you would be sending a zip file for somebody to execute through any other means. Came with this structure. They're asking you to install a SipAir plugin. This right here is actually just Chrome, like Google Chrome. It's a Chrome proxy. And they give you instructions to go ahead and install my malware.
And as you can see, this is not written in English, it's in Spanish, and so that gave us another reason to believe that this targeting was also in Mexico or another Spanish-speaking country, Latin America, or Spanish country over in Europe. But we wanted to, sometimes you can just identify some things about targeting just based on how the threat actor is operating. They're not trying to blend into the US, they're not trying to blend into English, so that gives us a little bit of information on targeting there as well.
So what does that MSI do? It really just holds the malware. This MSI has a config that you can actually dump, and it has a prerequisite of running an internal binary that is packaged up inside of the MSI that isn't the primary installation. That happened to be this adv.exe in this case, though they have been changing it quite rapidly over time. I think at the time that they were still doing this binary, there were like almost 150 MSI samples on VirusTotal that were easily trackable. So like they were fairly widespread. Oh yeah, it also likes to clean itself up. So we have file deleter over here. So after it actually runs itself, it cleans up any of the scripts that are run internally. And that binary was .NET. So we get to look at like every different language in this. So it runs in .NET, has a local client-side check to make sure that it's actually being run from Mexico. It checks the client's IP address via IP info, and makes sure that it's in Mexico before it even tries to install, before it tries to download the next stage in the kill chain. And interestingly enough, the user agent that they decided to use inside of the .NET binary is the same user agent that Alicore uses. I don't know why you would duplicate another malicious user agent for your installation process, other than I guess verification from their server side, but they're doing all their verification client side, so that I feel like was a pretty interesting find early on. So then they end up downloading the next stage from manzaswape.com, and we get to look at the binary. So this is it or at least this is one of the functions inside of IDA Pro, just showing that we have like a pegato.text, which is one of the unique functions built in, and they're literally just doing a copy paste. You can see the control V, and that's one of the commands that they can put inside. They also have like several other functions, easy to find, named ones, being able to identify, so you can identify the different targeted banks that they're actually going after based on the strings of the function names. And this is what the actual, these are a grouping of the images that they will actually use for pop-ups. So this is part of Alicore RAT. This is the client side. They'll actually force these to pop up whenever the victim browses to any of the banking websites. So not only are they trying to steal credentials via the standard notion of stealing them like off of saved locations on the system, but they are getting two-factor authentication sent directly to them by forcing these pop-ups on victims and having them enter that two-factor authentication. So how do we actually track this? So if you want to find new binaries, you can write YAR rules. So I found that hunting for their actual unique, they had a couple unique strings in the .NET downloader that led to several new samples. This was actually the code that did a decode. It does a decode, just a base64 decode on the downloaded zip file for the final payload for the Alicore RAT. And then we can actually search for just their custom functions inside of Alicore RAT. So we've got a few different ways that we ended up throwing these on VirusTotal and on our own internal scanning process so that we could identify new samples. But we can also hunt in network infrastructure. So we saw the giant SpongeBob meme. That's what I'm actually searching for here, is they had a unique HTTP body response that was opening bob.jpg as the background. And so I hashed that. Yeah. So I hashed that, look for the HTTP body hash up here, and it turns out we could dump their entire hosting infrastructure because it's a unique hash. Now we only dumped 12 results from here, and it turns out if you look for the favicon as well, we got 14 results. So we got a decent number of C2 just from hunting on like the hashes from the favicon and from the body hash. it turned out there was a ton of IP reuse. Almost all of the phishing infrastructure was hosted here. We had 14 different domains that were associated with just that one IP address. All of these were delivery infrastructure, and these were C2. Or I guess command and control for Allocore. So they obviously had segmented their infrastructure into different groups so they could update them independently, and they do update them independently. But they all use the exact same hosting provider. They decided to exclusively use HostWinds, hosted in Dallas, Texas.
And why did they do that, Jacob?
I don't know, but
We think we might know.
yeah. So generally, if you're trying to steal from somebody, you don't want your infrastructure to be accessible by the law enforcement agency. So if you were trying to rob from people in Mexico, you would probably want to host your infrastructure in a country that does not have the best relations with the between law enforcement groups. So with their infrastructure being in Texas, the FBI wasn't really going to look into any of the victims here in Mexico, and Mexican law enforcement is not going to have any jurisdiction to actually go look at the C2 infrastructure hosted in the US. And we found that all of the domains, it seemed, were actually registered for Mexico. So even though they were hosted in Texas, if you look up the domain registrations, they had a locale, like a contact country of Mexico. A couple of the early ones were Russian hosted. I don't know if they were trying to look for bulletproof hosting early on, or if they were trying too hard and decided that it was easier to just host in Mexico instead. But now you can still search through WHOIS information and look for things that are domain registered with the contact city of Nuevo Leon, and that still pulls up all of their C2 infrastructure. We also, like I told you before, we had ISP level NetFlow data. That NetFlow data showed a lot of victims, especially and exclusively in Mexico, but we also saw RDP access to several of the command and control servers from Starlink and from Starlink base stations in Mexico. So not like if the threat actor was using Starlink like in the US, you would assume that you would see base stations in the US that would then turn around and access US servers. But we see all of that access coming from geolocated Mexico stations. So from that, we have from that plus the language, plus the targets, we have a pretty good idea that all of this is Mexican instigated. So we have a Mexican threat actor that is targeting Mexican industries. And then I published a blog about all that information about a year and a half ago, and they stopped doing anything. All of a sudden, we stopped seeing Allocore Wrap pop up on a lot of our clients. We stopped seeing C2s being updated. We stopped seeing MSIs being uploaded to VirusTotal. It seemed like they had gone dark. And we're only one company, so that means either every antivirus company and EDR product decided they were going to start including all of our detections or all of the IOCs that we put out, or the threat actors actually read our blog too, and they decided they needed to change things. But after about 6 months, we got another Chancla. So we had another different client get compromised, and we found chancla.exe appear on their system. Also, that's the same. That's one of the old C2s that we saw previously that was identified through network pivots. They did decide that they wanted to update their zip section. They are still using a Chrome binary, but they are no longer alluding to ZipAir and was it IMSS, like the Mexican Social Security system on installation.
Yeah, they had expanded.
They also were really good, and they decided to move all of their geofencing to client or to server side. So now, instead of having the client check if it's in Mexico, they actually check whether the IP address is accessing the delivery infrastructure is coming from a Mexican IP address, and I had to jump through some proxies in order to get the next payloads. And we can see that it does actually also still hit trinipono.com. They updated the endpoint from license.txt to z1.txt for pulling the next stage of the payload. But these payloads, oh, and they updated the strings for all of their functions. They decided that since we were doing all of our detections based on a less than sign with a bar, they changed everything to squiggles in order to name their functions, and they decided to actually obfuscate a lot of their older functions. You can actually trace back when they started updating all of this. So after we released information about this actor a year and a half ago, they obfuscated all of their functions, but they are not obfuscating their new functions. So any new functions they're putting in, like it was definitely like just a one-time stamp. We're gonna do an update, try and hide how they were detecting us, and now we're gonna go about business as usual. So same thing you can see inside of Alicorp. This is actually a secondary delivery function inside of Alicorp. Before they were delivering a Chrome, just a Chrome plugin that was related to banks, but it basically told them not to go to specific banks or not to try and spoof, told them not to proxy certain banks, so they weren't going to try and steal from that. I'm guessing they had issues with actually being caught going through them. But now, instead of delivering a Chrome plugin, they are downloading binary and executing that, which happens to be System BC. But whenever we're hunting for them now we updated our user agent to hunt for the Alicorp user agent, which most people that use Alicorp change that user agent. These guys haven't. And this detects almost exclusively on Greedy Sponge's samples. We also now look for their unique strings that they've updated. You can actually use this exact same YARA rule, but drop out the squiggles and just search on the strings, like these specifically prepended function names, and you will pull up the new binaries. And that might be a little bit more robust, but it could also give you a little bit more noise if you were hunting for these guys. So yeah, that secondary infection is System BC, and I think that's the first time that we are seeing them use a paid commodity malware. And I think that's the next step up in this actor, where before they were using all open source tools, they were only delivering via mouse spam, and most of the things they were doing were not involved in them actually spending money on doing these campaigns. They were trying to do everything as cheaply as possible. So they must be making enough money that they can now buy malware to send to important compromises. They also changed their installation chain for the secondary infection is far more complicated, or far more advanced. Before, it was literally just an installation of a Chrome proxy or Chrome plugin, but now it actually uses a CMS-TP bypass, which is an exploit that allows the binary to be run as an elevated user. You can actually find the exact binary or tool that they're using at UAC bypass CMS-TP on GitHub for the exploitable GitHub repository. And from there, as opposed to loading up the default payload, they have the payload loaded up into the resources. This is a reuse of the same .NET downloader that is utilized in the MSI file, except that it points to System BC instead of Alicorp Router. So, new domains. same provider. Everything's still being utilized by or being hosted on Hostwinds in Dallas, Texas. You can see the old campaign stuff has overlap here with this domain, which is impossible to read on the screen, but the IP address overlap happens here and in a couple other areas. And so we can actually see all this new infrastructure as this older stuff is taken offline. So even though the IP addresses change, domain registration remains very, very similar, and IP reuse happens across shifting campaigns. So generally you will see older IP addresses be updated with the new C2 before that new C2 domain gets a brand new IP address. So how long have these guys been around? So the oldest payloads that I could find contacting their C2 started in July of 2021. So at least 4 years. Back then, they were literally just sending you Alicorp RAT in your email. They did not have any MSI files. I don't know how they were packaging it inside of the emails, but they were just directly delivering you Alicorp RAT. They finally updated their lure in December of 2021 and established that create UPRPS metadata inside of the binaries, which makes them very easy to trace back through probably like a 3-year period. But then obviously that was extremely successful. So one of the things we've noticed with threat actors is they're only going to update their campaigns when they have to. If they're being successful with their targeting and with extracting funds from the groups that they're targeting, if they're a financial actor like these guys, then they're not going to update anything. There's no reason to evolve. So for about 2 years or a year and a half, they were able to run on just Alicorp RAT with a specific lure, and they started adding this .NET downloader for getting the Alicorp RAT delivered in August of 2023. January of 2024, we released a blog whenever I was still working under BlackBerry before we got acquired, and all of a sudden they shut down everything, and they were offline for at least 1 month before we saw binary updates. But we really didn't see the campaign truly shift. Like these are more like follow-ons or like continuance of this previous campaigns that were still going on. We saw a real update in November of 2024. So they took like half a year to actually sit down and update all of their infrastructure, or at least like that delivery chain, add in the UAC bypass, and start delivering everything in a much more advanced fashion. So they target everybody. I think they really just target Mexico. Like if you are a business in Mexico, they're going to target you. I saw phishing pages for a MMA studio it was like elitesubmissions.com, and like it was literally just advertising for an MMA fight that they were phishing. We see tons and tons and tons of transportation and agriculture. Like Teresa Viva is targeted extremely regularly. Pretty much any truck company that is in the U.S. is targeted, or sorry, that is in Mexico is hit by these guys, and we can actually track that phishing infrastructure through the WHOIS registration information, and see new domains pop up every single day. The organization is fiscally motivated. I don't know that I have not seen anything of them actually just trying to steal information to get into like social media accounts or do espionage. They're purely fiscally motivated and trying to steal your banking credentials. They're located in Mexico, since we found they're only Spanish speaking. All of the targets we've identified are in Mexico. There are a few C2 that have WHOIS information located in Colombia, but none of those C2s have been accessed from non-Mexican locations that I have seen. All of the C2 is still located in Texas and being accessed by Mexican victims. And they're doing a banking Trojan. Their capability has really exploded over the last 4 years, right? Going from basically something that a high schooler can do to, I guess, something that in 5 years another high schooler could do, because everything's gotten easier. But right, we've seen them iterate year over year, adding new capabilities for the delivery infrastructure and trying to anonymize themselves to some degree. They do take the time to obfuscate their WHOIS information with they are using privacy WHOIS services in order to register these domains, but they have unique identifiers inside of those that we can track. They are phishing. They have custom.NET code, so we know that they can program to at least some degree. They are updating Alicorn, so for some reason they can program in more than one language. And they're starting to use commodity malware, so they're plugged into the to these nefarious systems, right? They can at least get on Hack4, and they're starting to be built into the black hat community. Yeah. Fuck you. What questions?
Yeah. Is it okay if I say a few things?
Yeah, only for the question. Only for asking anyone a question.
¿Alguna pregunta para los speakers? ¿Alguna pregunta? No? So Jacob, Laura, thank you so much for all that information. It's
Thank you
very
for having
helpful.
us.
Un aplauso grande, por favor, a Jacob. Now, we know what happens if we execute chancla.exe in our systems, you know? So thank you so much, Jacob, Laura. Again, that was a very, very interesting information. That is our last conference. So esta es nuestra preúltima conferencia. Viene la última conferencia y luego viene el cierre. Por favor, queden atentos. Ya estamos prácticamente por cerrar y todos dicen, y todos dicen, porque después de esto viene pues nuestra reunión del B-Sides 2025. Así que chicos, creo que en 3 minutitos empezamos con la siguiente conferencia. Así que no se muevan, estamos por el cierre y continuamos.
También una pequeña noticia para ustedes. Todavía quedan algunos tazas